What if the person you trust to bring you comfort is the one who erases you from the world? My name is Marissa Hale, 32 years old, a doctor who stitched lives back together in a community that had come to love me for it. People knew me not just for medicine, but for small kindnesses. Groceries left at an old man's porch, medicine covered when families couldn't pay, the quiet hours spent listening when no one else would. But kindness doesn't shield you from what waits in the dark. That night, November 14th, I left the hospital after a crushing night shift. My body ached with exhaustion, my stomach hollow from hours without food. When I pushed open the door to my apartment, the emptiness was almost louder than the silence. No meal waiting, no warmth. Hunger forced me to do what so many of us do without thinking. I ordered delivery. I expected comfort in a paper bag. Instead, it was the beginning of my disappearance. The knock came soft, too soft, as if whoever stood outside didn't want the neighbors to hear. I remember pausing, one hand still clutching my stethoscope, the other reaching toward the door. That simple act, opening it, became the last decision anyone in my city would ever know me for. Because by morning, I wasn't there anymore. And weeks later, my body would be found miles away, hidden at the back of a cold, forgotten lake. But in that moment, standing in the dim light of my apartment, all I knew was hunger and trust. The kind of trust that cost me everything. The bag was heavier than I expected. Its weight dragged against my fingers, as though something inside pressed harder than it should. The receipt was blank. No name, no price, just a slip of paper that meant nothing. I should have noticed then. I should have asked myself why. But exhaustion is a cruel thief. It steals the questions that could save you. I remember lifting my eyes toward the delivery driver, a man whose features seemed oddly blurred by the hall's failing light, as if the shadows themselves chose him. He didn't speak. He only nodded once, too slowly, and turned away before I could thank him. For a second, I thought of calling after him, but my voice stayed trapped in my throat. And then the hallway swallowed him whole. Back inside, the silence seemed sharper, the air tighter. The smell of the food was wrong. Grease layered with something bitter, something metallic that made my stomach coil instead of settle. My phone buzzed. A message from the app. Your order has been completed. Driver, unavailable. That word, unavailable, felt like ice. Because even before the first bite, I realized this wasn't about hunger anymore. This was about being chosen. And I had just opened the door to the one who chose me. I set the bag on the counter, but something about it made me hesitate. The paper was damp at the bottom, the way it sags when liquid seeps through. I unrolled the top. Inside, steam curled upward, but the smell hit me like a warning. Not food, not comfort. Something chemical, sharp, unnatural, the kind of scent that clings to your hands long after you touch it. My stomach twisted. I stepped back. Then I noticed it, written in black marker on the inside flap of the bag, almost hidden beneath the fold. Left with you. The words didn't make sense. They didn't belong to a receipt or to a stranger dropping off dinner. A chill spread across my chest. I glanced at the door. The hallway light outside buzzed once, then went dead, throwing the corridor into silence and shadow. My phone slipped in my hand as I tried to call the number listed on the app. It rang once, then disconnected. That's when I realized this wasn't an accident. Someone had stepped into my life with purpose, and I was standing in the center of it, alone, holding the proof. By morning, the questions had already begun. When neighbors realized I hadn't left for work, when my shift went uncovered at the hospital, calls were made. The police traced the order through the delivery app, pulling up the records like a neat line of facts. But the neatness shattered instantly. The system showed no delivery scheduled to my address that night. No driver assigned. No payment processed. According to their records, nothing had ever arrived. Yet the bag sat there, still on my counter. The food untouched, cold. The inked message glaring like a signature no one wanted to claim. Detectives ran the security cameras in the hallway. The feed flickered and froze at the exact minute the knock came to my door. Frames missing, like someone had sliced time apart. Then, the detail that broke the silence in the room. The man caught briefly on the stairwell camera wore no uniform, carried no insulated bag. His face turned just enough toward the lens to reveal eyes hidden beneath a shadowed cap. When investigators pulled the driver list from the company, no one matched him. Not a single name. It was as if a stranger had walked out of the night, carrying a bag no one logged, delivering a message no one could explain. And with me gone, the questions only deepened. The first week was a blur of interviews, search parties, and press conferences that ended in silence. Detectives sifted through neighbors' statements, the food container, the tampered camera feed, all dead ends. With every report that went nowhere, the official language grew colder. Possible voluntary absence. Stress-related disappearance. As if I had simply walked away from the life I had spent years building. But people in my community refused to believe it. Patients who had no one else, families I had helped through their darkest hours. They stood outside the precinct holding signs with my name, refusing the idea that I could abandon them. And then, quietly, another detail surfaced. One officer reviewing my old emergency room cases noticed a pattern. Repeated encounters with a single family over the years. A brother whose injuries always seemed to come from nowhere. A mother who appeared with hollow eyes, refusing to speak. A man in the background who never gave his name. I had documented every visit, pushing for help, insisting someone look deeper. But the system often turned its gaze away. Now, with my disappearance, those records looked different. Because buried in those reports was a name. One that had surfaced once before, linked to violence on the edges of town. A name the police had overlooked until I was gone. And suddenly, my kindness to strangers no longer looked like charity. It looked like the beginning of a motive. The officer who kept digging, against his supervisor's advice, finally traced the paper trail back far enough. Buried among overlooked records was a name tied not just to emergency room visits, but to restraining orders, dropped charges, and whispers from neighbors who had long since stopped talking. Dave Mercer. A man I had once treated for a knife wound he refused to explain. A man who left the hospital without signing discharge papers, disappearing into the night like a ghost. The more they searched, the more his outline sharpened. He had worked delivery jobs before, never staying longer than a few weeks. His history was littered with gaps, towns abandoned, complaints that never stuck. And then came the detail no one could ignore. The handwriting on the delivery bag, "Left with you," matched a note placed in my hospital file years earlier. A scribbled message left on the back of a discharge slip after a late-night altercation in the ER. No one had connected it then. Now it was undeniable. The man who had slipped through the cracks of a broken system had walked straight back into my life. Not as a patient this time, but as the shadow at my door. And with that revelation, the investigation shifted. This was no longer about a missing doctor. It was about a predator who had been circling for years. They found me miles away from the life I built. Not in the city where I healed patients, where my neighbors left flowers by the clinic door, where children waved at me in the grocery aisles. But at the edge of a lake 2 counties over, the kind of place where no one stops unless they're running from something. My body lay in the shallow water, tangled in reeds, the current carrying pieces of my story I would never tell myself. The community that once looked to me for hope now stood at vigils, holding candles that burned against the night. My colleagues wept into microphones, repeating the same truth. Marissa gave everything, and this is what was taken in return. Police said it ended with my discovery. But whispers stretched further. People asked how a delivery driver with no clear record could slip through every safeguard. How a single bag left at a door could hold a life's undoing. And then came the question that still lingers, long after the sirens faded. If it happened once, to someone loved, visible, protected, how many more are out there, waiting in silence, unseen, unheard, until the knock at the door comes for them? This is not just a story. It's a warning. Subscribe to the Veil of Secret because some shadows never stay buried.